Moving on now to the UK, where millions of Britons have started casting their votes in general elections, seen as the most unpredictable in a generation. The voting will be underway until 2100 GMT. Exit polls are to be published immediately, with the final results expected Friday afternoon. Prime Minister David Cameron's Conservative Party and the opposition Labour are considered as the main rivals in the race to the Westminster. Small parties, including the Scottish National Party, the right-wing UK Independence Party and Liberal Democrats, are seen as the kingmakers. Conservative and Labour parties will struggle to form a coalition with these parties.
50 million Britons have already been registered to vote. There are nearly 50,000 polling stations across the country. This year's parliamentary election is seen as the most unpredictable in decades. There are 650 parliamentary seats up for grabs. Latest polls suggest that Labour and Tories are neck and neck, with neither party expected to win overall majority. Weeks of political uncertainty is expected to surround the UK as the country is heading toward a hung parliament.
Well, we have our correspondents stationed across the UK. We have our correspondent Mohammed Walji in London and our other correspondent Ed Augustin in Glasgow. First of all, let's go to London and talk to Press TV's Mohammed Walji. Mohammed, over to you. Tell us more about the whole turnout today.
Well, the turnout's expected to be extremely high for this election. We're seeing queues outside several of the polling stations. There's 50,000 polling stations across the country, and we're seeing queues outside of them. And one of the reasons we're seeing so many people turning out to vote in this particular election is because it's too close to call. But what I think we will be seeing also actually is a lot of people may not actually vote for a particular party. They may spoil their ballot. And the message they're trying to send by doing that is that we are not apathetic politically, but we do not support any of the parties because we don't agree with what they're doing and there's no trust for these parties.
And have there been any reports of irregularities so far?
So far we haven't had any reports of any irregularities, but if we cast our minds back to 2010, about 1,500 people weren't able to vote in the UK election despite turning up to the polling station before the closing time of 10 p.m. So the regulators have been extra cautious in this particular election to make sure that the polling stations will remain open for all of those that turn up to the polling station and are queuing by 10 p.m.
Well, Press TV's Mohammed Walji reporting from London. Thanks there, Mohammed. And let's go to Glasgow and let's get the Scottish opinion about the votes in the UK with our correspondent Ed Augustin. Ed, over to you.
Hi there. Yeah, I'm in Glasgow right now. It's an exciting day here in Scotland. Voting turnout expected to be very high. Of course, the Scottish referendum last year had 85% voter turnout, the highest ever voting turnout in any UK election. I'm joined here by Jen Stout, who's a campaign organiser for the independent campaign group 38 Degrees. Thanks for joining us, Jen.
Hi.
Jen, how do you see the election playing out?
I really couldn't say. I know everyone's saying that, but it is just very, very unpredictable. Even in Scotland, I think we don't know.
And the polls are showing that despite Scotland traditionally being Labour territory, the SNP are due to do very well. Do you think that? Why do you think that the SNP have been polling so high?
I mean, again, we don't know if those figures are going to come true or if they will, but certainly Labour are facing a real crisis in Scotland. And I think it's a general disillusionment in Scotland. Things have shifted so much since the referendum, and that year was just an incredible time. And people are demanding great things and full of hope for the future. And I think they're looking to the traditional parties and struggling to find it.
Many people I've spoken to today said that in many ways the election that's taking place today in Scotland, the feeling of energy, the real buzz around politics is in many ways a legacy to the referendum. What made the referendum so special? How was politics in Scotland energised by that event?
Well, it sounds cheesy, but I think it was imagination and hope. I think these things are really important, and I think we lacked them for a long time over the last sort of 10, 20 years in the UK in general. I know a lot of people in England were inspired by the referendum, especially when they came up and heard the arguments and debates. And it was people starting to question every structure around us and look at the system and whether it's not just the change of government, but a change of society overall.
And of course, one of the main issues in this election for Scottish voters will be the question of democracy. And there does seem to be a feeling of apathy that the main three establishment parties in some ways don't represent the interests, don't represent the preferences of Scottish people. And I know you are keen to talk about one of the issues that's going to be important for Scottish voters, which is TTIP. Could you tell us a little about that?
Yeah, so TTIP is the trade and investment partnership, transatlantic trade and investment partnership, and it does, the evidence suggests that it poses a fundamental threat to democracy, which sounds a little bit out there, but it would, with the kind of, it's a trade deal between the EU and the US that would result in the lowering of standards around environmental protections, labour rights, and also establish potentially secret courts where corporations can sue governments. So it really does call into question the whole functioning of our democracy, if that can be the case. And there is a great deal of opposition to it, particularly among our members who, in Scotland, it's been a massive issue for our members. They've been campaigning very, very hard on it over the last few weeks and months.
So if TTIP goes through, this could mean further deregulation of labour rights, further degradation of the environment. What have the main three parties, Labour, the Liberal Democrats and the Conservatives, what is their position on TTIP?
They're all broadly in favour of TTIP. They believe that it will bring economic benefits. I think a lot of the evidence suggests, and our members' general feeling is that this is a questionable basis. It's a sort of trickle-down theory, and that actually TTIP, there's been other evidence coming out that TTIP would result in a lowering of standards and of wages as well.
Okay, and you were telling me earlier that the Scottish National Party have been pushed by citizens and members of your organisation to adopt a very different or a somewhat different stance on TTIP. Could you explain that?
Yeah, it's been an interesting few months really. A lot of our members, not all of them, but some are active SNP members, and there was a big feeling around the conference a couple of months ago that the SNP, they've been talking about TTIP a lot and a feeling that they would have a stronger position, and what they came out with in conference I think a lot of people were disappointed in, and since then we've a lot of our members have been contacting them in their thousands, contacting their candidates that are standing in the SNP and just asking why there isn't a stronger position, and the response has been really good. And last week we saw Stuart Hosey announce that when we 38 Degrees members questioned him in Dundee in a live stream, he said that they would always vote against anything with ISDS in it, which is the secret court mechanism. So we do see them shifting, and I think that's a great thing that they're responding to civic pressure.
Thanks very much, Jen.
Okay.
So I think we can see from that interview that the Scottish Nationalist Party, even though their main issue is Scottish nationalism, do seem to have been forced on at least one, but there are others as well, economic and social issue, to move their position away from the neoliberal consensus that the main three political parties in Westminster seem attached to, and perhaps that might explain their rise in the polls. Back to you in the studio.
All right, Press Ed Augustine reporting from Glasgow. Thanks, Ed. And to put these elections into perspective, let's go to London and talk to Marcus Papadopoulos, editor with Politics First. Welcome to the programme, sir. Mr. Papadopoulos, what is this election all about? I mean, what is Britain voting for?
Well, this election is like no other before it, and that's what makes it unbelievably intriguing, because if the opinion polls are correct, it will mean that the dominance of the Conservative and Labour Party in British politics is over, and Britain will start to resemble Europe in that it will become more of a multi-party country. So that's why this election is so important. And also as well, this time tomorrow we will know the results, but we won't necessarily know who will form the next government. Now, of course, that's going to be worrying a lot of people in industry. That will be potentially detrimental to the economy. Then there will be questions of legitimacy. For example, if either Ed Miliband or David Cameron achieve, say, 35% of the popular vote, should they really become Prime Minister when most people in Britain have not voted for them? Now that's a question of legitimacy. That's why some people in Britain, they favour a change in the voting system. But we should be alive to the distinct possibility that this autumn there could be another general election called if this whole situation is not resolved.
And of course, how critical is this election for each party, especially the administration of incumbent David Cameron?
Oh, it's absolutely critical. If David Cameron does not remain as Prime Minister, if Ed Miliband does not become Prime Minister, if Nick Clegg, the leader of the Liberal Democrat Party, does not keep his position as Deputy Prime Minister, they will be quickly replaced as leaders by their party. So it's very, very important for the three party leaders. And also as well, we can step back and we can look at the bigger picture, because once again, if the opinion polls are correct, then the Scottish National Party, the SNP in Scotland, look like they're going to dominate the political scene in Scotland. It looks like they could achieve something like 30 to 40 MPs. Now that will add great momentum to their desire, to their fundamental drive of bringing about an independent Scotland. So much is at stake with this election.
And of course, one of the main issues concerning the Scots is the issue of the Trident. I mean, if they're able to gain more seats in Parliament, would they be able to resolve that issue?
Well, Scotland last year voted to remain a part of the Union, and the SNP accepted that. However, if David Cameron remains as Prime Minister, be it with a Conservative minority, a Conservative majority government, or in coalition, for example, with the Liberal Democrats and or the Democratic Unionist Party, then there's going to be no question about Trident remaining in Scotland. However, if Ed Miliband becomes Prime Minister, say of a minority Labour government, he's going to have to work with smaller parties. Now that could be the Liberal Democrats, but if they get decimated in this election, there won't be enough MPs for him to rely on, which means he will have to work with the SNP. And of course the SNP have said that one of their fundamental principles is to see Scotland free of nuclear weapons. So there will be a lot of very tough negotiations, and undoubtedly there will have to be compromises between the Labour Party of Ed Miliband and the Scottish National Party of Nicola Sturgeon.
Now let's consider a picture with no party being able to win in these elections, and of course that will result in a hung parliament. What would a hung parliament mean for the country?
Well, a hung parliament will mean that no party has gained a majority in order to form the next government. So, in essence, there could be political paralysis for the next few weeks, because parties will be seeking to try and form a coalition with other parties. They will try and seek an agreement with other parties to vote with them on certain issues. So this is so unpredictable, this election. It's impossible to predict. And you know, in 2 weeks' time, Britain still might not have a government. It all depends about the maths. This time tomorrow we will see exactly how many Conservative MPs there are and how many Labour MPs there are, and crucially how many SNP MPs there are and how many Liberal Democrat MPs there are. There's a lot of talk at the moment of the SNP holding the keys to Downing Street. Well, that's potentially true, but also don't underestimate the Liberal Democrats. The Liberal Democrats, when it comes to a local level, they're very, very good campaigners. They're extraordinarily resilient. And if they come down to about 15 or 20 MPs, they've got about 50 at the moment, if they come down to about 15 or 20 MPs, then really the SNP are going to hold the keys to Downing Street. However, if the Liberal Democrats come down to, say, 30, 35 MPs, then once again the Liberal Democrats could offer a coalition, or they could offer a voting agreement to, say, the Labour Party or to the Conservative Party. So yes, we need to look at how many Labour MPs there will be and how many Conservative MPs there are, but I personally believe, crucially, how many SNP MPs there will be and how many Liberal Democrat MPs there will be.
All right, we'll leave it there for the time being. Many thanks to Marcus Papadopoulos, editor with Politics First from London. Thanks for your time there, sir.